Welcome back to Night Echoes, where the darkness reveals what daylight conceals. Tonight we're exploring the world of security, night shifts, those lonely hours when guards become the only witnesses to events that shouldn't happen. Encounters that challenge the boundaries between the living and the dead. Asterisk, turn off your lights, put on your headphones, and join me as we explore 5 very disturbing true security night shift horror stories that will make you quit your job tomorrow. Story 1. The office tower Achama Marcus. Shun had been working night shift security at the Meridian Tower in downtown Seattle for 3 years when he first encountered something that would forever change his understanding of what occupied the 40-story office building after business hours ended. Marcus worked for Sentinel Security Services, a company that provided overnight protection for commercial buildings throughout the Pacific Northwest region. The Meridian Tower was a prestigious assignment within Sentinel's portfolio. Built in 1987, the building housed law firms, financial services companies, medical practices, and corporate offices for several Fortune 500 companies. During business hours, over 2,000 people worked in the building, but after 6 p.m., the tower became Marcus's responsibility. 40 floors of empty offices, conference rooms, and corridors that he monitored and patrolled. Throughout his 12-hour shift, Marcus's routine was well established and methodical. His shift began at 8 p.m. with a comprehensive security briefing that included reviewing the day's visitor logs, checking for any maintenance alerts or special instructions from building management, and testing all electronic security systems. From 9 p.m. until 6 a.m., Marcus conducted hourly patrols of all accessible floors, monitored security cameras from his station in the lobby, and responded to any alarms or unusual activity throughout the building. The building's security infrastructure was state-of-the-art, featuring keycard access controls for all floors, motion sensors in common areas, security cameras covering all entrances and main corridors, and a centralized monitoring system that logged all activity throughout the building. Marcus had received extensive training on all systems and had developed expertise in distinguishing between legitimate security concerns and the normal sounds and minor alerts that occurred in any large building during overnight hours. Marcus enjoyed the solitude and responsibility of his night shift position. The pay was excellent for security work. The building was modern and well maintained, and he appreciated the independence that came with being the sole security presence in such a large facility. He had never experienced any significant security incidents during his 3 years at Meridian Tower, and he took pride in maintaining the excellent safety record that made the building attractive to high-profile tenants. On October 15th, Marcus began what seemed like a routine night shift, but would become the first of many encounters that would challenge his understanding of what occurred in the Meridian Tower after midnight. The evening had started normally. Marcus completed his initial security checks, reviewed the building's status reports, and settled into his monitoring station in the main lobby to begin his overnight watch. Around 11:30 p.m., during Marcus's first floor-by-floor patrol of the night, he noticed something unusual on the 23rd floor. This floor housed the offices of Blackstone Financial Group, a wealth management firm that typically maintained strict security protocols and never authorized after-hours access except for scheduled maintenance. As Marcus stepped off the elevator onto the 23rd floor, he immediately noticed that lights were on in several offices that should have been dark. The main corridor lighting was activated, and he could see illumination coming from at least 3 different office suites along the main hallway. Marcus checked his security log and confirmed that no after-hours access had been authorized for the 23rd floor that evening. Building management maintained detailed records of all authorized overtime work, maintenance activities, and special access requests. and Marcus had received no notifications about any legitimate activity on the Blackstone financial floor. Following standard security protocols, Marcus approached the lighted offices carefully, using his flashlight and radio to maintain communication with Sentinel's central dispatch station. He announced his presence as he moved through the corridor, following procedures designed to ensure the safety of both security personnel and any authorized individuals who might be working late. Security Patrol, 23rd floor. Is anyone authorized to be in the building? Please identify yourself. Marcus received no response to his announcement, but as he approached the first lighted office suite, he could hear sounds of normal business activity coming from inside. Office chairs moving, filing cabinets being opened and closed, papers being shuffled, and what sounded like hushed conversations between multiple people. Marcus used his master keycard to access the Blackstone Financial Suite and called out again as he entered the reception area. Building security. I need to verify that anyone present is authorized to be in the building after hours. Please respond immediately. The sounds of office activity continued from deeper within the suite, but no one responded to Marcus's calls for identification. Following his training protocols, Marcus contacted Sentinel Central Dispatch to report the situation and request guidance. Dispatch. This is Marcus Chen at Meridian Tower. I have unauthorized activity on the 23rd floor. Multiple individuals appear to be present in the Blackstone financial offices without proper authorization. Requesting immediate backup and instructions for handling the situation. Copy, Marcus. Backup is en route. Estimated arrival in 15 minutes. Do not attempt to confront unauthorized personnel directly. Monitor the situation and maintain safe distance until backup arrives. Marcus positioned himself in the reception area of the Blackstone suite and waited for backup while monitoring the ongoing activity in the interior offices. He could clearly hear multiple people moving around, having conversations, and apparently conducting normal business operations despite the late hour and lack of authorized access. As Marcus waited, he began to notice details about the activity that seemed increasingly strange. The conversations he could overhear sounded professional and business-related, but he couldn't make out specific words or understand the content of the discussions. The sounds of office work continued consistently. No breaks, no pauses, no normal interruptions that would be expected during a late-night work session. When Sentinel backup security officers arrived 20 minutes later, Marcus led them to the 23rd floor to investigate the unauthorized activity. The two additional officers were experienced in handling building security incidents and came equipped with additional communication equipment and protocols for safely confronting unauthorized individuals. When Marcus and the backup team entered the Blackstone Financial Suite, they found all the offices completely empty and dark. The lights that Marcus had observed were now turned off. The sounds of business activity had stopped entirely, and there was no evidence that anyone had been present in the offices. The suite was exactly as it should have been during overnight hours, empty, quiet, and secured. Marcus was confused and somewhat embarrassed by the situation. He had clearly observed lights and heard business activity in the offices, but now there was no trace of any human presence. The backup officers conducted a thorough search of the entire 23rd floor and found no signs of unauthorized access, no evidence that anyone had been in the building, and no explanation for Marcus's observations. Marcus, are you sure you saw lights and heard people in these offices? One of the backup officers asked. Everything looks normal to me. Marcus was certain about what he had experienced, but he had no way to prove that unauthorized activity had occurred. The backup officers completed their search and returned to their regular assignments, leaving Marcus to continue his overnight patrol with a growing sense of unease about what he had encountered. Over the next several weeks, Marcus began experiencing similar incidents with increasing frequency. Always on the 23rd floor, always involving the Blackstone financial offices, and always following the same pattern. Lights would be on in offices that should have been dark. Sounds of business activity would be clearly audible. But when Marcus investigated or brought backup to verify the situation, the offices would be empty and quiet. Marcus began researching the history of Blackstone Financial and the 23rd floor of Meridian Tower. He learned that the wealth management firm had occupied the floor for over 15 years, and that the company's founding partner, Robert Kellerman, had died of a heart attack in his office on the 23rd floor in 2019. According to newspaper accounts of Kellerman's death, he had been found by cleaning staff early in the morning after working alone in his office late into the night. Kellerman had been known for his dedication to his clients and his habit of working extremely long hours, often staying in the office until 2 or 3 a.m. to complete financial analyses and investment research. Marcus realized that the timeline of Kellerman's typical work schedule matched exactly with when he was observing unauthorized activity on the 23rd floor. The sounds of business activity, the lights in the offices, and the professional conversations he overheard all occurred between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., exactly when Kellerman had habitually worked. During his years at Blackstone Financial, Marcus decided to test his theory by conducting more detailed observations of the 23rd floor during the time frame when Kellerman had typically worked. Instead of immediately investigating the unauthorized activity, Marcus would watch and listen from the elevator area to gather more information about what was occurring. During his next encounter with the phenomenon, Marcus positioned himself in the 23rd floor elevator lobby and observed the Blackstone offices from a distance. He could see lights on in what building directories indicated was Kellerman's former corner office, and he could hear the sounds of someone working alone, papers rustling, office chair creaking, and occasionally what sounded like phone conversations. Marcus decided to approach Kellerman's former office directly and see if he could communicate with whoever was present. As he walked down the corridor toward the lighted corner office, Marcus called out in a respectful tone, "Mr. Kellerman? If that's you, I'm Marcus Chun, the night security guard for this building. I know you're dedicated to your work, but the building is closed for the evening." The sounds of office activity stopped immediately when Marcus spoke Kellerman's name. After a few moments of silence, Marcus heard a voice respond from inside the corner office, a male voice, probably middle-aged, speaking in a professional tone. "I apologize for the disturbance. I'm just finishing up some important client work. I'll be done shortly." Marcus approached the office door, which was closed but not locked. "Mr. Kellerman, I understand that your work is important, but building policy requires that all personnel leave by 6 p.m. unless special authorization has been granted." "Of course. I know the building policies. I just need a few more minutes to complete this analysis. My clients are depending on this research." Marcus waited outside Kellerman's office for approximately 10 minutes, listening to continued sounds of someone working inside, typing, papers being moved, and what sounded like financial calculations being performed. But when the sounds finally stopped and Marcus tried to enter the office, he found it completely empty and dark. Marcus continued his night shift duties at Meridian Tower for another 8 months, regularly encountering Robert Kellerman's continued presence on the 23rd floor. The encounters followed a consistent pattern. Kellerman would be working in his office during his habitual late-night hours. He would respond politely when Marcus spoke to him, and he would promise to finish his work and leave the building shortly. But Marcus never saw Kellerman directly, and the office was always empty when Marcus finally entered to investigate. Marcus eventually transferred to a different building assignment with Sentinel Security Services, but he maintained contact with the security guards who replaced him at Meridian Tower. According to his colleagues, the unauthorized activity on the 23rd floor continued after Marcus left, and building management had informally acknowledged that Robert Kellerman's dedication to his clients had apparently survived his death. The current security staff at Meridian Tower have developed an informal understanding with Kellerman's presence. They monitor the 23rd floor to ensure that no living unauthorized individuals are present, but they don't disturb Kellerman during his continued work hours between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. because some people are so dedicated to their work that they continue their professional responsibilities even after death, ensuring that their clients receive the attention and service they deserve, regardless of whether the advisor is still technically alive to provide it. And some night shift security guards learn that their job isn't just about protecting buildings from unauthorized living visitors, but also about respecting the dedication of those who love their work too much to ever really leave the office. Story 2. The hospital security rounds. Patricia Williams had been working night shift security at Memorial General Hospital in Phoenix, Arizona for 5 years when she began to understand that her job involved monitoring more than just the living patients, visitors, and staff who moved through the medical facility during overnight hours. Patricia worked for Guardian Health Security, a company that specialized in providing protection services for healthcare facilities throughout the Southwest region. Memorial General was a 400-bed hospital that provided comprehensive medical services including emergency care, surgery, intensive care, and specialized treatment programs. The facility operated 24 hours a day, but the overnight shift had a distinctly different character than daytime operations. Fewer staff members, quieter corridors, and an atmosphere that seemed to amplify every sound and shadow in the large medical complex. Patricia's responsibilities included monitoring security cameras throughout the hospital, conducting regular patrols of all accessible areas, ensuring that visitor access was properly controlled during overnight hours, and responding to any security issues that might arise. The hospital's security infrastructure was extensive, featuring controlled access points, comprehensive video surveillance, alarm systems, and communication equipment that allowed Patricia to coordinate with medical staff and external emergency services when necessary. Patricia enjoyed the healthcare security environment because it combined the independence of night shift work with the meaningful purpose of protecting vulnerable patients and supporting medical staff during critical overnight operations. She had received specialized training in healthcare security protocols, patient privacy requirements, and emergency medical procedures. That made her an integral part of the hospital's overnight operations team. The night shift at Memorial General had its own rhythm and routine that Patricia had learned to navigate effectively. Emergency room activity continued throughout the night. Surgical procedures were sometimes scheduled during overnight hours, and intensive care units maintained constant monitoring and treatment of critical patients. Patricia's role was to ensure that security concerns didn't interfere with the medical care that continued around the clock. On November 3rd, Patricia began a night shift that would introduce her to aspects of the hospital that weren't covered in her security training or orientation materials. The evening started routinely. Patricia completed her initial security briefing with the day shift supervisor, reviewed any special instructions or alerts for the overnight period, and began her regular patrol schedule through the hospital's various departments and floors around 12:30 a.m. During Patricia's second floor-by-floor patrol of the night, she encountered something unusual while checking the fourth-floor medical ward. This floor housed general medical patients who were receiving treatment for non-critical conditions, patients recovering from surgery, individuals receiving medication monitoring, and people undergoing diagnostic procedures that required overnight observation. As Patricia walked through the fourth-floor corridors, conducting her routine security check of the area, she noticed that one of the patient rooms was exhibiting activity that seemed inconsistent with normal overnight medical care. Room 418 had its door partially open, lights were on inside the room, and Patricia could hear what sounded like a normal conversation between multiple people. This wasn't necessarily unusual. Medical staff frequently provided overnight care that required room lights and conversation between healthcare providers and patients. But something about the activity in room 418 seemed different from normal medical care operations. Patricia approached room 418 to conduct a standard security check, ensuring that any activity in the room was authorized and didn't represent a security concern for the hospital. As she got closer to the room, she could hear the conversation more clearly, and she realized that it didn't sound like typical medical care interactions. Instead of hearing discussions about medications, treatment plans, or patient care procedures, Patricia heard what sounded like a social conversation between family members or friends. Multiple voices were engaged in casual discussion about everyday topics, work, family, weekend plans, and other subjects that had nothing to do with medical care. Patricia looked through the partially open door into room 418 and saw what appeared to be a normal family gathering. 4 or 5 people were present in the room, sitting in chairs around the hospital bed and engaged in relaxed conversation. The individuals appeared to be adults of various ages, and they seemed comfortable and familiar with each other in ways that suggested they were related or close friends. But Patricia immediately noticed something that didn't make sense about the scene in room 418. According to the hospital's overnight visitor policies, family members and friends were not permitted to visit patients after 9 p.m. except in cases of terminal illness or other special medical circumstances that required administrative approval. Patricia checked her security log and confirmed that no special overnight visitor authorizations had been granted for room 418. She also checked the room assignment records and found that room 418 was currently listed as unoccupied. No patient had been assigned to the room, and it should have been empty except for routine cleaning and maintenance, following standard hospital security protocols. Patricia knocked on the doorframe of room 418 and identified herself to the people inside the room. "Excuse me, this is hospital security. I need to verify visitor authorization for anyone present after normal visiting hours." The conversation inside the room stopped immediately when Patricia spoke, but no one responded to her request for visitor verification. Patricia waited for a reasonable time and then repeated her request, speaking more loudly to ensure that everyone in the room could hear her. "This is hospital security. Hospital policy requires that all visitors leave by 9 p.m. unless special authorization has been granted. I need to speak with whoever is responsible for this group." Still no response from inside room 418. Although Patricia could hear what sounded like people moving around and gathering their belongings, Patricia waited for several minutes and then entered the room to address the visitor policy violation directly and ensure that unauthorized individuals left the hospital premises. When Patricia entered room 418, she found the room completely empty. No visitors, no patient, no personal belongings, and no evidence that anyone had been present in the room. The room was clean, the hospital bed was properly made with fresh linens, and all medical equipment was positioned exactly as it should be in an unoccupied room. Patricia was confused by what she had observed. She had clearly seen and heard multiple people in room 418 just moments earlier, but now the room showed no signs of recent occupancy. She conducted a thorough search of the room, checking the bathroom, closet, and any other areas where people might have hidden, but found no trace of the Visitors she had observed. Patricia contacted the nursing staff on the fourth floor to report the unusual situation and verify that no unauthorized visitors were present in the medical ward. This is security. I encountered what appeared to be unauthorized visitors in room 418, but when I entered the room to address the policy violation, I found it completely empty. Can you confirm whether room 418 is currently assigned to a patient? The night shift nurse checked the room assignment system and confirmed Patricia's information. Security, room 418 is currently unoccupied and has been empty since yesterday afternoon. We have no patients assigned to that room, and no visitors should be present anywhere in the room. Can you explain why I observed multiple people in room 418 having a conversation? The nurse was quiet for a moment before responding. Security, room 418 has a history that some of our staff are familiar with. You might want to speak with Nurse Johnson, who has worked the night shift here for over 10 years. She can provide you with background information about that room. Patricia contacted Nurse Johnson, who agreed to meet with her during her next break to discuss room 418. When they met an hour later, Nurse Johnson provided Patricia with information that explained her unusual encounter. Patricia, room 418 has been the subject of reports from security staff and medical personnel for several years. In 2018, we had a patient in that room, an elderly man named Frank Morrison, who died during the night while his family was visiting. The family had been granted permission to stay overnight because Frank was in his final hours, and they wanted to be with him when he passed away. What happened that night? Frank's death was peaceful and expected, but his family was devastated by the loss. They had been very close to Frank, and they spent several hours in the room with him after he died, talking about memories and sharing stories about his life. The family found comfort in being together in the room where Frank had spent his final days. And you think that's related to what I observed tonight? Patricia, since Frank Morrison died in room 418, multiple staff members have reported seeing and hearing family gatherings in that room during overnight hours. Always the same pattern, normal family conversation, multiple people present, and the room appearing occupied when it should be empty. Patricia asked Nurse Johnson whether the hospital administration was aware of the unusual activity in room 418. Administration knows about the reports, but they don't interfere with what happens in the room as long as it doesn't disrupt medical care or patient services. Most of our overnight staff have learned to work around the situation. What do you mean, work around it? We don't assign patients to room 418 during overnight hours when the family gatherings are most likely to occur. During the day, the room functions normally and can be used for patient care. But between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., we try to leave the room available. For Frank Morrison's family, Patricia continued working night shift, security at Memorial General for another 3 years after her first encounter with the Morrison family gathering. Over that period, she regularly observed the family reunion that took place in room 418 during overnight hours, and she developed her own understanding of how to respect the family's continued presence while maintaining hospital security. Patricia learned that the Morrison family gathering followed a predictable schedule. They typically arrived around midnight and departed before 4 a.m. During their visits, they engaged in normal family conversation, shared memories of Frank Morrison, and provided each other with the comfort and connection that had been so important to them during Frank's final days. Patricia also learned that other hospital staff had developed their own ways of acknowledging and respecting the Morrison family's continued presence at Memorial General. Nursing staff would sometimes leave chairs arranged in room 418 as if expecting visitors. Housekeeping staff would ensure that the room was especially clean and welcoming, and medical staff would avoid scheduling procedures or activities that might disturb the family gathering. Patricia eventually was promoted to a supervisory security position at Memorial General, and she made sure that new night shift security officers were briefed about Room 418 and the Morrison family situation. She explained that the family's continued presence was a reminder that Memorial General was not just a medical facility, but a place where families experienced some of their most important and emotional moments. Room 418 teaches us that some family bonds are so strong that they survive death. Patricia would tell new security officers during their orientation, "Our job is to protect and respect all the families who find comfort at Memorial General, whether they're visiting living patients or continuing relationships that death couldn't end. Because some family gatherings are too important to be interrupted by death. And some rooms in hospitals become permanent meeting places for people who loved each other too much to let mortality end their time together." And some hospital security guards learn that their job includes protecting not just the living patients and visitors, but also the families who have found ways to stay connected to loved ones and to places that provided comfort during life's most difficult moments. Story 3. The mall security patrol. David Park had been working overnight security at Riverside Shopping Center for 2 years when he realized that the massive retail complex never truly emptied. Even during the hours when all stores were closed, lights were dimmed, and the mall was officially closed to the public. David worked for Nightwatch Security, a company that specialized in protecting large retail facilities during overnight hours throughout the greater Chicago area. Riverside Shopping Center was one of the largest shopping malls in the Midwest, featuring over 200 retail stores, restaurants, entertainment venues, and service businesses spread across 3 levels and over 2 million square feet of retail space. During business hours, the mall attracted thousands of shoppers, diners, and visitors, but after 10 p.m., the complex became David's responsibility. Miles of corridors, dozens of entrances, and hundreds of storefronts that he monitored and protected. Throughout his 10-hour overnight shift, David's responsibilities included conducting regular patrols of all mall areas, monitoring security cameras throughout the complex, ensuring that all store entrances remain properly secured, responding to alarm activations from individual businesses, and coordinating with local police when security incidents required additional support. The mall's security infrastructure was comprehensive, featuring motion sensors, surveillance cameras, access control systems, and communication equipment that allowed David to monitor and protect the enormous retail facility effectively. The overnight security position at Riverside required physical fitness, attention to detail, and the ability to work independently for extended periods. David's patrol route covered all 3 levels of the mall, including the main shopping corridors, food court areas, department store sections, service corridors, and parking garage levels. Completing a full patrol took approximately 90 minutes, and David conducted 6 complete circuits during each overnight shift. David enjoyed the unique challenges of mall security work. The combination of retail protection, public safety, and emergency response kept the job interesting, and he appreciated the trust that mall management placed in him to protect millions of dollars worth of merchandise and property during vulnerable overnight hours. He had developed expertise in identifying potential security threats, distinguishing between legitimate alarms and false alerts, and maintaining the safe environment that made Riverside Shopping Center attractive to both retailers and shoppers. On December 8th, David began an overnight shift that would challenge his understanding of who occupied Riverside Shopping Center during the hours when the mall was officially closed to the public. The evening had started routinely. David completed his initial security briefing, tested all electronic systems, and began his first patrol of the complex around 10:30 p.m. During David's second patrol of the night, around 12:45 a.m., he encountered something unusual while checking the main-level food court area. The food court at Riverside was a large open space, surrounded by approximately 15 restaurants and food service businesses, with seating for several hundred people arranged in the center of the area. As David approached the food court during his patrol, he noticed that lights were on in several of the restaurants, which should have been completely dark during overnight hours. He could also see what appeared to be people seated at tables in the main seating area, engaged in what looked like normal dining activities. This was clearly a security violation. All food court businesses were required to close by 9 p.m. All lights were supposed to be turned off except for minimal security lighting, and no unauthorized individuals were permitted in the mall during overnight hours. David approached the food court carefully, using his flashlight and radio to document the security breach and prepare to address the unauthorized activity. As he got closer to the seating area, he could see more details about the people who were apparently dining in the closed food court. A family group of 4 or 5 people was seated at one of the central tables, engaged in what appeared to be a normal restaurant meal. They had food and drinks on their table. They were talking and laughing together, and they seemed comfortable and relaxed as if they were dining at the mall during regular business hours. David could also see that several of the surrounding restaurants appeared to be open and operational, despite being hours past their required closing time. Kitchen lights were on, service windows were illuminated, and there were signs of food preparation activity that should not have been occurring during overnight hours. Following standard security protocols, David announced his presence and requested identification from the unauthorized individuals in the food court. "This is mall security. The shopping center is closed and no one is authorized to be in this area. Please identify yourselves and explain your presence in the building." The family dining at the table looked up when David spoke, but they didn't respond to his request for identification. They continued their meal and conversation as if David hadn't spoken to them. Appearing to be unaware of or unconcerned about his presence, David repeated his security announcement, speaking louder and more authoritatively to ensure that the family understood the seriousness of the policy violation. "This is mall security. You are trespassing on private property after business hours. You need to stop what you're doing and leave the premises immediately, or I will contact local police to have you removed." The family still didn't respond to David's commands, but they began gathering their belongings and preparing to leave their table. David positioned himself near the main entrance to the food court to ensure that the unauthorized individuals left the mall entirely rather than moving to another location within the complex. As David watched the family prepare to leave, he noticed something that didn't make sense about their appearance and behavior. The family members looked somewhat dated in their clothing and hairstyles, as if they were dressed in fashions from 10 to 15 years earlier. Their conversation, which David could now hear more clearly, included references to movies, music, and current events that seemed to be from the mid-2000s rather than current topics. The family finished gathering their belongings and began walking toward the exit, passing by David's position near the food court entrance. As they approached him, David tried once more to engage them in conversation and verify their identities. "Excuse me, I need to see identification and understand how you gained access to the mall after closing time." The family members looked directly at David as they passed by his position, but they didn't stop or respond to his request. They continued walking toward the main mall corridors as if David wasn't present or couldn't be heard. David followed the family as they left the food court area and began walking through the main shopping corridors toward what appeared to be one of the mall's main entrances. But as David followed them, he noticed that the family was moving in a way that didn't seem quite right. They seemed to glide rather than walk normally, and they didn't make the usual sounds of footsteps on the mall's hard, flooring surfaces. When the family reached the main corridor intersection near the department store Anchor, they simply disappeared. David was watching them continuously as they walked, but when they reached a specific point in the corridor, they faded from view as if they had never been present in the mall. David was confused and concerned about what he had experienced. He conducted a thorough search of the food court area and found no evidence that anyone had been dining there. No food remnants, no dishes, no signs that any of the restaurants had been operating during overnight hours. The entire food court was exactly as it should have been during overnight hours, dark, empty, and secure. David contacted Nightwatch, Security's central dispatch, to report the unusual incident and request guidance about how to handle the situation. Dispatch: This is David Park at Riverside Shopping Center. I encountered what appeared to be unauthorized individuals in the food court area, but when I attempted to address the security violation, the individuals disappeared. Requesting advice on how to document and handle this type of incident. Copy, David. Document the incident in your security log with as much detail as possible. If you encounter similar activity during the remainder of your shift, follow standard protocols and request backup if needed. David completed his patrol and documented the food court incident, but he was troubled by the experience and uncertain about what he had witnessed. Over the following weeks, David began researching the history of Riverside Shopping Center and the food court area to understand if there might be an explanation for his unusual encounter. David learned that, in 2019, a family had been involved in a tragic incident at Riverside Shopping Center. The Thompson family, parents and 2 teenage children, had been dining in the food court when the father, Michael Thompson, suffered a fatal heart attack. Despite immediate medical attention from mall security and emergency responders, Michael had died at the scene while his family was with him. According to newspaper reports about the incident, the Thompson family had been regular visitors to Riverside Shopping Center for many years. They had a tradition of family dinners at the food court every Friday evening, and Michael Thompson had always insisted that these family meals were the most important part of his week. The timeline of the Thompson family's regular visits to the food court matched exactly with when David had observed the family dining during his security patrol. The location, the family composition, and even the casual, comfortable atmosphere of their meal corresponded with the newspaper descriptions of the Thompson family's weekly tradition at Riverside Shopping Center. David realized that he might have witnessed the Thompson family continuing their weekly dinner tradition, despite the fact that Michael Thompson had died in the food court 2 years earlier. David continued working overnight security at Riverside Shopping Center for another 18 months after his first encounter with the Thompson family. During that period, he regularly observed the family's continued presence in the food court during his overnight patrols, and he developed an understanding of their schedule and routine. The Thompson family typically appeared in the food court between midnight and 2 a.m., always at the same table where they had been dining when Michael suffered his fatal heart attack. They would engage in normal family conversation, enjoy their meal together, and spend approximately 90 minutes in the food court before departing through the main mall corridors. David learned that other night watch security officers who had worked at Riverside before him were familiar with the Thompson family situation, and that mall management had informally acknowledged their continued presence during overnight hours. The Thompson family found so much happiness in their weekly dinners at the food court that they continued to meet here even after Michael's death. One senior security officer explained to David, "As long as they don't interfere with mall operations or security, management allows them to continue their family tradition." David eventually transferred to a different mall assignment with Nightwatch Security. but he maintained contact with colleagues who continued working at Riverside Shopping Center. According to these officers, the Thompson family continued their weekly food court dinners, providing a reminder that some family traditions are too important to be ended by death. David's experience at Riverside Shopping Center taught him that shopping malls, like other spaces where people create important memories and meaningful traditions, can become permanent gathering places for families whose connections survive mortality, because some family dinners are so precious that they continue even when one family member can no longer physically join the meal. And some traditions are too important to be interrupted by death. And some mall security guards learn that their job includes protecting not just the physical property and merchandise, but also the spaces where families have created memories and traditions that deserve to be honored and respected, regardless of whether all family members are still among the living. Story 4. The warehouse night guardian Robert Kim had been working overnight security at the Pinnacle Medical Research Facility in Denver, Colorado for 4 years when he discovered that the biomedical research complex housed more than just laboratory equipment, scientific instruments, and experimental materials during the hours when the day shift scientists and researchers had gone home. Robert worked for BioSecure Solutions, a company that specialized in providing security services for pharmaceutical and medical research facilities throughout the Rocky Mountain region. Pinnacle Medical Research was a state-of-the-art biomedical facility that conducted clinical trials, drug development research, and experimental medical treatments under contract with pharmaceutical companies and government health agencies. The facility operated under strict security and safety protocols due to the sensitive nature of the research conducted there and the valuable equipment and materials housed. Throughout the complex, the facility consisted of multiple laboratory buildings, administrative offices, storage warehouses for research materials, and specialized treatment areas where clinical trial participants received experimental medications and therapies. During business hours, over 300 scientists, researchers, clinicians, and support staff worked at Pinnacle, but after 6 p.m., the complex became Robert's responsibility, securing millions of dollars worth of research equipment and protecting sensitive medical research that could impact the health of thousands of future patients. Robert's overnight security duties were comprehensive and demanding. He monitored sophisticated security systems that protected laboratory areas containing dangerous materials, conducted regular patrols of all facility buildings, maintained detailed logs of all access and activity throughout the complex, and responded to any security alerts or emergency situations that might arise during overnight hours. The security infrastructure at Pinnacle was among the most advanced that Robert had encountered in his security career. The facility featured biometric access controls, environmental monitoring systems that track temperature and air quality in sensitive laboratory areas, surveillance cameras with motion detection capabilities, and alarm systems that could detect unauthorized access attempts or safety violations throughout the complex. Robert had received specialized training in biomedical security protocols, hazardous materials safety, and emergency response procedures that made him qualified to work in the high-security research environment. He took pride in contributing to important medical research by ensuring that Pinnacle scientists could focus on their work without concerns about security or safety issues. On January 14th, Robert began an overnight shift that would introduce him to research activities that weren't included in Pinnacle's official research programs or documented in the facility's project management systems. The evening had started normally. Robert completed his security briefing with the day shift supervisor, reviewed any special protocols or alerts for the overnight period, and began his regular patrol of the facility's various buildings and laboratory areas. Around 1:15 a.m., During Robert's second patrol of the complex, he encountered unusual activity while checking Building C, which housed Pinnacle's clinical research laboratories, where experimental treatments were administered to volunteer study participants. Building C was supposed to be completely unoccupied during overnight hours, except for minimal maintenance staff who had specific schedules and authorization protocols. As Robert approached Building C, he noticed that lights were on in several laboratory areas that should have been dark during overnight hours. He could also see through the building's security windows that there appeared to be people inside the laboratories, apparently conducting research activities that had not been authorized for overnight operations. This represented a serious security violation and potential safety hazard. All research activities at Pinnacle required specific authorization from facility management, detailed safety protocols, and documentation to ensure compliance with federal regulations governing biomedical research. Unauthorized research activities could compromise ongoing studies, create safety risks, and violate the legal requirements that allowed Pinnacle to conduct clinical trials. Robert used his master access card to enter Building C and investigate the unauthorized activity. As he entered the main laboratory area, he could hear sounds that indicated active research was being conducted, laboratory equipment operating, conversations between multiple researchers, and the normal sounds of clinical procedures being performed. Robert followed standard facility security protocols and announced his presence to identify whoever was conducting unauthorized research activities. This is facility security. All research activities in Building C are supposed to be suspended during overnight hours. I need to speak with whoever is responsible for current activities and verify proper authorization. Robert received no direct response to his announcement, but the sounds of research activity continued from deeper within the laboratory complex. Robert could hear what sounded like clinical procedures being conducted, medical equipment operating, researchers discussing treatment protocols, and what appeared to be patient care activities. Robert proceeded through Building C's main laboratory areas, following the sounds of unauthorized research activity. As he moved through the facility, he noticed that the clinical research areas appeared to be fully operational, with laboratory equipment running, treatment stations prepared for patient care, and research materials arranged as if active clinical trials were being conducted. Robert reached the main treatment area where Pinnacle's most important clinical trials were conducted, and he could see that multiple research stations were occupied by what appeared to be researchers and study participants engaged in experimental treatment sessions. At least 7 individuals appeared to be present in the treatment area, several researchers wearing standard laboratory clothing and what looked like study participants receiving experimental treatments at individual clinical stations. The researchers appeared to be conducting normal clinical trial procedures, monitoring participants, recording data, and following the safety protocols that Pinnacle used during authorized research activities. Robert announced his presence again, speaking loudly enough to ensure that everyone in the treatment area could hear his security alert. This is facility security. No research activities are authorized in Building C during overnight hours. All personnel need to stop current activities and provide identification and authorization for being present in the facility. This time, one of the researchers looked up from his workstation and acknowledged Robert's presence. Security. We're conducting critical research that requires overnight monitoring. We have authorization to continue our work during extended hours. Robert checked his security log and found no documentation of overnight research authorization for Building C. Pinnacle maintained extremely detailed records of all authorized research activities, and Robert had received no notifications about legitimate overnight work being conducted in the clinical laboratory areas. Sir, I have no record of overnight research Authorization for Building C. I need to see documentation of approval for extended research activities. And I need identification from all personnel present in the facility. Of course. Let me get the authorization paperwork for you. Robert waited while the researcher gathered documentation. But as he observed the ongoing clinical trial activities, he noticed details that seemed unusual even for Pinnacle's advanced research programs. The experimental treatments being administered appeared to be more intensive and complex than the clinical trials that Robert was familiar with from his regular facility patrols during business hours. The participants appeared to be receiving treatments for conditions that seemed more severe than the typical research studies conducted at Pinnacle. Most concerning, some of the study participants appeared to be in medical condition that would normally require hospitalization rather than participation in outpatient clinical trials. They looked extremely ill, and they were receiving treatments that seemed more appropriate for terminal patients than for the healthy volunteers who typically participated in Pinnacle's research programs. The researcher returned with a folder of documentation and handed it to Robert for review. As Robert examined the paperwork, he realized that the clinical trial information didn't match any of the approved research programs that were supposed to be conducted at Pinnacle. Sir, this documentation appears to be for a research study that isn't on Pinnacle's approved project list. Can you explain what type of research you're conducting and why it's not included in facility management's records? This is a special research program that requires enhanced security protocols. The study participants are volunteers who have terminal illnesses and are receiving experimental treatments that might extend their lives or improve their quality of life during their remaining time. Robert understood that Pinnacle occasionally conducted compassionate care research for terminally ill patients, but these programs required special approval and were always conducted during regular business hours with full medical support staff present. Sir, all compassionate care programs require administrative approval and must be conducted during regular facility hours. I need to contact facility management to verify authorization for this research activity. That's not necessary. We have all required approvals, and our research is scheduled to conclude before morning shift arrives. Robert attempted to contact Pinnacle's facility management through the emergency notification system to verify the authorization for overnight clinical research. But when he looked up from his communication equipment, he found Building C completely empty and dark. The researchers, study participants, laboratory equipment, and experimental treatments had all disappeared. The clinical treatment area was exactly as it should have been during overnight hours, unoccupied, secured, and with all equipment properly shut down for the night. Robert was confused and concerned about what he had witnessed. He had clearly observed active clinical research being conducted, had spoken with researchers, and had examined documentation for experimental treatments. But now there was no evidence that anyone had been present in Building C during overnight hours. Robert conducted a thorough search of Building C and found no signs of recent research activity, no indication that laboratory equipment had been operating, and no evidence that clinical trials had been conducted. All security systems showed normal overnight status, with no unauthorized access or unusual activity recorded. Robert documented the incident in his security log and reported the situation to Biosecure Solutions Management. Over the following weeks, Robert began researching Pinnacle's history and the background of Building C to understand if there might be an explanation for his unusual encounter. Robert learned that Pinnacle Medical Research had previously conducted a clinical trial program for terminally ill cancer patients who had exhausted all conventional treatment options. The experimental program, conducted in Building C between 2016 and 2018, had offered last resort treatments to 7 volunteers who had agreed to participate despite the high risks and uncertain outcomes of the Experimental therapies. According to medical research records, all 7 participants in the Terminal Cancer Research Program had died during the course of the clinical trials. The experimental treatments had not been successful in extending life or improving quality of life for any of the study participants, and the research program had been discontinued due to the unsuccessful outcomes. Timeline and details of the terminated CANCER research program matched exactly with what Robert had observed. During his encounter with unauthorized research activity in Building C, the number of participants, the types of treatments, and even the intensive care protocols corresponded with the medical records of the failed experimental program. Robert realized that he might have witnessed the 7 terminal cancer patients continuing their participation in the experimental research program, despite the fact that their treatments had been unsuccessful, and they had all died during the original clinical trials. Robert continued working overnight security at Pinnacle Medical Research for another 2 years after his first encounter with the continuing cancer research program. During that period, he regularly observed the resumed clinical trials in Building C during overnight hours, and he developed an understanding of the schedule and routine followed by the researchers and study participants. The experimental research typically resumed around 1 a.m. and continued until 4 a.m., always following the same intensive treatment protocols that had been used during the original clinical trials. The 7 participants continued to receive experimental therapies, and the researchers continued to monitor their conditions and record data, apparently hoping to achieve the positive outcomes that had not been possible during their original participation in the program. Robert learned that other Biosecure Solutions officers who had worked at Pinnacle were familiar with the continued cancer research program, and that facility management had informally acknowledged that the terminated clinical trials had resumed during overnight hours. The 7 cancer patients were so desperate to find treatments that might save their lives that they continued to participate in experimental research even after their deaths. One senior security officer explained to Robert, as long as their continued research doesn't interfere with Pinnacle's authorized programs, management allows them to continue hoping for the breakthrough treatments they never received during their lifetimes. Robert eventually transferred to a different facility assignment with Biosecure Solutions, but he maintained contact with colleagues who continued working at Pinnacle Medical Research. According to these officers, the cancer research program continued during overnight hours, providing a reminder that some hopes for medical breakthroughs survive even when the patients who needed those treatments don't live to benefit from them. Robert's experience at Pinnacle taught him that medical research facilities, like other places where people confront life's most critical challenges, can become spaces where determination and hope persist. Even after death ends the possibility of physical healing, because some patients are so committed to finding cures for their conditions that they continue participating in experimental research even after their diseases have claimed their lives, hoping that their continued participation might eventually help other patients who face the same devastating diagnoses. And some biomedical security guards learn that their job includes protecting not just the equipment and materials used in authorized research, but also the spaces where patients continue searching for the medical breakthroughs that could have saved their lives if those discoveries had come in time. Story 5. The campus night. Pietro L. Angela Torres had been working overnight security at Riverside University in Portland, Oregon for 6 years when she realized that the sprawling academic campus never truly emptied. Even during the late night hours when students were supposed to be in dormitories, faculty had gone home and the university was officially closed except for essential services. Angela worked for Campus Safety Solutions, a company that specialized in providing security services for colleges and universities throughout the Pacific Northwest. Region. Riverside University was a prestigious private institution with over 8,000 students and faculty spread across a 400-acre campus that featured academic buildings, research facilities, student housing, administrative offices, recreational facilities, and the extensive library systems that supported the university's academic programs. The campus had a rich history dating back to 1892, and many of its buildings were historic structures that had housed generations of students and scholars. Angela's overnight security responsibilities covered the entire university campus, including monitoring building access, conducting safety patrols of outdoor areas, responding to emergency calls from students and staff, coordinating with local police when serious incidents occurred, and ensuring that campus facilities remained secure during vulnerable overnight hours. The university's security infrastructure included electronic access controls, emergency communication systems, surveillance cameras in public areas, and patrol vehicles that allowed Angela to cover the large campus. Effectively. Angela enjoyed the campus security environment because it combined the variety of academic life with the meaningful purpose of protecting students, faculty, and staff during overnight hours when they might be vulnerable to crime or emergency situations. She had developed relationships with many students and faculty members through her security work, and she took pride in contributing to the safe, educational environment that made Riverside University attractive. To students and families, the overnight shift at Riverside had its own character and challenges that Angela had learned to navigate successfully. Some academic buildings remained open 24 hours to accommodate students who needed to work on projects, conduct research, or access computer facilities. Dormitories required regular security checks to ensure student safety. Graduate students and faculty sometimes worked late hours in research laboratories or academic offices. Emergency situations could arise that required immediate response and coordination with external agencies. On March 7th, Angela began an overnight patrol that would introduce her to aspects of campus life that weren't covered in university security manuals or student orientation programs. The evening had started routinely. Angela completed her shift briefing, reviewed any special instructions or campus alerts, and began her regular patrol route through the various areas of the university campus. Around 1:45 a.m., during Angela's patrol of the academic core area, she encountered something unusual while checking Hartwell Hall, the university's main library building that housed over 1 million books, extensive research collections, and study areas that were popular with students during late-night study sessions. Hartwell Hall was supposed to close at midnight during regular academic periods, and Angela's security protocols included ensuring that the building was properly secured and that no unauthorized individuals remained inside after closing hours. But as Angela approached the main entrance to Hartwell Hall, she noticed that lights were on in several areas of the building that should have been dark. Angela used her security access to enter Hartwell Hall and investigate the apparent policy violation. The main lobby area of the library was illuminated, and Angela could hear sounds of normal academic activity coming from the upper floors. People walking, books being moved, chairs scraping against floors, and what sounded like studying or research activities. This wasn't necessarily a serious security violation. University policy allowed students to remain in study areas after official closing hours if they had been in the building before midnight and were conducting legitimate academic work. But Angela needed to verify that anyone present in Hartwell Hall after closing hours was authorized to be there and wasn't violating campus safety regulations. Angela climbed to the second floor of Hartwell Hall, following the sounds of academic activity, As she reached the main study area, she could see that several people were present in the library, apparently engaged in serious research activities. But something about the scene didn't look quite right. That an elderly man was seated at one of the large research tables, surrounded by stacks of old books and what appeared to be historical documents. He was wearing clothing that looked somewhat outdated, a formal suit and tie that seemed more appropriate for earlier decades than current academic fashion. He appeared to be deeply absorbed in his research, taking notes in a handwritten journal and carefully examining historical materials. Angela approached the researcher to conduct a standard security check and verify that he was authorized to be in the library after closing hours. "Excuse me, sir. I'm with campus security. The library officially closed at midnight, and I need to verify that you're authorized to remain in the building for extended study hours." The elderly researcher looked up from his work and acknowledged Angela's presence with a polite smile. "Of course, officer. I have special permission to conduct research during overnight hours. I'm working on a historical analysis that requires access to materials in the rare books collection." Angela was familiar with the university's procedures for granting after-hours library access to faculty and graduate students conducting research that required special materials or extended time periods. These arrangements were typically coordinated through the library administration and documented in security logs. "Sir, can you provide me with documentation of your authorization for overnight library access? And I'll need to see your university identification." "Certainly. Let me gather the paperwork for you." The researcher began organizing his materials and searching through his belongings for the requested documentation. As Angela waited, she noticed more details about his research that seemed unusual, even for the advanced academic work typically conducted at Riverside University. The books and documents surrounding the researcher appeared to be extremely old and valuable leather-bound volumes, handwritten manuscripts, and historical materials that looked like they belonged in special archival collections rather than general circulation. The researcher's note-taking methods also seemed old-fashioned, using fountain pens and handwritten journals rather than the computers and digital devices that modern scholars typically used for research. Most notably, the historical period that the researcher appeared to be studying seemed to focus on the late 1800s and early 1900s, exactly the time period when Riverside University was being established and its early academic programs were being developed. The researcher returned with a folder of documentation and handed it to Angela for review. As Angela examined the paperwork, she realized that it included materials that didn't look like current university authorization forms. "Sir, this documentation appears to be quite old. Can you explain your current affiliation with Riverside University and the research project you're working on?" "I'm Professor Edmund Hartwell, and I'm conducting research on the historical development of academic programs at Riverside University. This research is part of my ongoing work documenting the university's early years and the contributions of its founding faculty members." Angela recognized the name Edmund Hartwell as the historian for whom the library building had been named. According to university history, Professor Hartwell had been one of Riverside's early faculty members and had played a key role in developing the university's academic programs and library collections during the late 1800s. "Professor Hartwell, I believe you're the individual for whom this library building was named. Can you tell me about your current position at the university?" "Yes, I've been working at Riverside University since 1887, and I've devoted my career to building the academic programs and research collections that support our students and faculty. This research project will help document the university's development and ensure that our institutional history is properly preserved." Angela realized that Professor Edmund Hartwell had died in 1925, according to university historical records. But the elderly researcher in front of her appeared to be genuinely engaged in continuing his lifetime work of documenting Riverside University's academic development. Professor Hartwell, can you tell me what year you believe it to be? It's 1923, and I'm working to complete my historical analysis before the university's 35th anniversary celebration next year. Angela understood that she was encountering Professor Edmund Hartwell's continued dedication to his research work. Despite the fact that he had died nearly 100 years earlier. Professor Hartwell, your research is very important to the university's historical records. Please continue your work and let me know if you need any assistance accessing materials in the library. Thank you, officer. I appreciate the university's support for my research. Documenting our academic history is essential for understanding how Riverside University became the institution it is today. Angela continued working overnight security at Riverside University for another 4 years after her first encounter with Professor Hartwell's continued research activities. During that period, she regularly observed the professor's presence in Hartwell Hall during overnight hours, and she developed an understanding of his research schedule and routine. Professor Hartwell typically worked in the library between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., always conducting research on university history and the development of academic programs during Riverside's early years. He was always polite and professional when Angela encountered him during her security patrols, and he seemed genuinely dedicated to completing research projects that had been important to him during his lifetime. Angela learned that other campus safety solutions officers and library staff were familiar with Professor Hartwell's continued presence at Riverside University, and that university administration had informally acknowledged his ongoing research activities. Professor Hartwell was so dedicated to documenting the university's history that he continues his research even after death. One senior librarian explained to Angela, his work was never really finished during his lifetime, and the research he's conducting now fills in gaps in our institutional records that help us understand how Riverside University developed its academic reputation. Angela eventually was promoted to a supervisory security position at Riverside University, and she made sure that new overnight security officers were briefed about Professor Hartwell and his continued research activities in the library. Professor Hartwell represents the dedication to scholarship that makes Riverside University special, Angela would tell new security officers during their orientation. Our job is to support all the researchers who find value in the university's academic resources, whether they're current students and faculty or scholars, who have maintained their commitment to learning even after their formal academic careers ended. Angela's experience at Riverside taught her that universities, as centers of learning and intellectual pursuit, can become permanent homes for scholars whose dedication to knowledge and research survives even death, because some academic research is so important that it continues even when the researcher is no longer officially alive to complete it. And some scholars form such strong connections to their universities that they remain part of the academic community permanently. And some campus security officers learn that their job includes protecting not just the current students and faculty, but also the scholars who have found ways to continue their intellectual pursuits and contribute to the university's mission of education and research, regardless of whether they're still technically among the living members of the academic community. Their teenage children, Sarah and James, had been dining in the food court when Michael Thompson suddenly suffered a massive fatal heart attack while eating dinner with his family. Despite immediate medical attention from mall security, emergency responders, and medical personnel from a nearby urgent care facility, Michael Thompson died at the scene while his devastated family surrounded him. The incident had been traumatic, not just because of Michael's unexpected death, But because the Thompson family had been regular visitors to Riverside Shopping Center for many years, creating deep emotional connections to the space. According to the newspaper reports and interviews with family friends, the Thompson family had maintained a sacred tradition of family dinners at the food court every Friday evening for over 8 years. Michael Thompson had always insisted that these family meals at Riverside were the most important part of his week, providing essential time for the family to connect, share their experiences, and maintain the close relationships that had defined their family life throughout the children's adolescence. The Friday dinners had been Michael's idea originally, created as a way to ensure that his busy work schedule as a sales manager never prevented him from spending quality time with his wife and children, even when work pressures mounted or when the teenagers had other social commitments. Michael had insisted that Friday family dinners at Riverside were non-negotiable family time that took priority over everything else. The timeline of the Thompson family's regular visits to the food court matched exactly with when David had observed the family dining during his security patrol. The location at the central table, the family composition of parents and 2 teenage children, the casual and comfortable atmosphere of their meal, and even the specific restaurants they typically ordered from corresponded precisely with the newspaper descriptions of the Thompson family's weekly tradition at Riverside Shopping Center. David realized that he might have witnessed the Thompson family continuing their sacred weekly dinner tradition, despite the fact that Michael Thompson had died in the food court nearly 4 years earlier and that the surviving family members had presumably been devastated by the loss of their husband and father in the very place that had been so central to their family happiness. David continued working overnight security at Riverside Shopping Center for another 18 months after his first encounter with the Thompson family. During that period, he regularly observed the family's continued presence in the food court during his overnight patrols, and he developed a deep understanding of their schedule, routine, and the profound importance of their continued gatherings. The Thompson family typically appeared in the food court between midnight and 2 a.m. every Friday night, always at the same central table where they had been dining when Michael suffered his fatal heart attack. They would engage in the same warm family conversation that had characterized their weekly dinners during Michael's lifetime, enjoy their meal together with the same relaxed and loving interaction patterns, and spend approximately 90 minutes in the food court before departing. Through the main mall corridors, the family's behavior during these continued dinners was identical to what David imagined their weekly tradition had been during Michael's life. Animated conversation between parents and children, laughter and storytelling, and the comfortable family dynamics of people who genuinely enjoyed spending time together and valued their weekly connection. David learned that other Night Watch security officers who had worked at Riverside before him were familiar with the Thompson family situation, and that mall management had made an informal decision to acknowledge their continued presence during overnight hours rather than treating it as a security violation that needed to be eliminated through enforcement or building modifications. The Thompson family found so much happiness and meaning in their weekly dinners at the food court that they continued to meet here even after Michael's death. One senior security officer explained to David during a training session about unusual situations that security personnel might encounter. As long as they don't interfere with mall operations, don't damage property, and don't create security concerns for other people, management has decided to allow them to continue their family tradition. Are you saying that the mall officially accommodates the continued presence of deceased patrons and their families? Not officially in any written policy, but practically in terms of how we handle the situation. Michael Thompson's death was so traumatic for his family, and their weekly dinners were such an important part of their lives and family identity, that their continued presence represents something meaningful and touching rather than something that should be prevented or eliminated. Some family traditions are too important and too central to people's lives to be ended by death. David eventually transferred to a different mall assignment with Night Watch security, when a position opened at a newer facility closer to his home. But he maintained contact with colleagues who continued working at Riverside Shopping Center. According to these officers, the Thompson family continued their weekly food court dinners throughout David's absence, providing a consistent reminder that some family traditions are too powerful and meaningful to be interrupted by mortality. David's experience at Riverside Shopping Center taught him that shopping malls, like other spaces where people create important memories and meaningful traditions, can become permanent gathering places for families whose connections and traditions survive the loss of family members. Because some family dinners are so precious and central to family identity that they continue even when one family member can no longer physically join the meal, and some traditions are too important to family happiness to be interrupted by death. And some mall security guards learn that their job includes protecting not just the physical property and merchandise, but also the spaces where families have created memories and traditions that deserve to be honored and respected, regardless of whether all family members are still among the living.